this biblical and practical strategies in working through the system of stress and anxiety is huge. And it is a system, and we're going to see how this is a system. So this is more of an introduction talk into this, and I'm going to do follow-up talks in another 2 months. So every 2 months, we're going to try to do a seminar. We only get really an hour and a half, so an hour of speaking. I try to do the workbooks as user-friendly as possible, but here's the good news. You can have and get the video and the PowerPoint again for free. So you email Pastor Matt, he'll send you the whole content. Because often when you're in a seminar, yeah, what did he say there? Or I missed that. So we're actually going to give the video and the PowerPoint away as well, and you can use it any way you want. So if you wanted to hold a Bible study, or you wanted to hand some friends, and you know what, whether you're religious or not here tonight, here's the neat thing. We all have anxiety and stress, and that's key. And we want to understand that as a system. So in the Bible, we believe in 1 Peter. 1 Peter was written to a group. There's a guy by the name of Peter. He wrote 2 books, 1 and 2 Peter, and he wrote it to a group who was suffering. I mean, suffering terribly. And so he gave them this truth, casting all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. And obviously he was talking about God. Casting all your anxieties. And the Greek word for anxiety means fragmented, disjointed. My daughter, my adopted daughter, she's 6. She loves puzzles, loves them. And she has fetal alcohol syndrome, so she can lose it very quickly. And she mixed 3 or 4 puzzles up. And so she tried to put, it was Paw Patrol. And she tried to put, I think it was a Disney puzzle. I think it was Minnie Mouse or Mickey Mouse, and she tried to fit them together, but she obviously couldn't. So I helped her to separate them, and then we started putting it together. But because she was frustrated, she threw the puzzle pieces, so they became fragmented and disjointed. But here's the good news about that. We had the box, which is helpful. We don't have the box of life, but we did have the box, and we were able to bring it back together. That word, irene, in the Greek, irene, means peace. Isn't that beautiful? So the anxious means to be fragmented and disjointed, but the ability to bring it back together into its fit means peace. And so God, we can cast all our fragmented thoughts on him. Why? Because he is our source of care. We are his focus of concern. Thanks be to God. So God sees. And God not only sees, God sees to it. Now, it's not a one-fit-all, because life, in fact, the first book I'm writing is a combination of all of these systems, and it's going to be called Accepting What We Would Rather Not. Accepting What We Would Rather Not, ... and life sucks. Because it does. However, we got to accept most anxiety and stress is relieved by at least 60% when we accept what we would rather not. And interesting, the first chapter is going to call Accepting What You Would Rather Not and Accepting That Which You Would Rather Not. Because we would rather not accept things that go wrong. True or false? Anybody here a whiner or a complainer? I am. Well, right there, we're not accepting it. So it can cause stress and anxiety, but God cares for us. And he's not just he hasn't just wound up the world like a big clock. He understands. So what is the definition? Let's get straight into the definition of stress. Stress can be defined as a state of worry or mental tension, caused by a perceived, and this is going to be a key word, perceived or actual difficult situation. And that's important. Stress is obviously a natural human response. Everybody has stress of some kind. In fact, not all stress you'll see tonight is bad stress, but it's perceived or actual difficult situation. It's a state of worry about that. Now, this is key. Though stress is in terms of tasks, most stress, believe it or not, has its origin in attachment relationships. That's going to be a key concept. Attachment relationships. Who we're connected with. And we're going to talk about that in just a little moment. But most stresses are because of us and people. I have a book, Annoying People, and Why You're One of Them. And we are. We have this tense of running one another up the wrong way. Anybody who's been married knows that. Anybody who's had a close, intimate relationship knows that. Anybody who's had a boss, or you're a boss, you know that. And it's based on attachment relationships. I'm going to see why that's important. So what is the meaning of the word stress? Well, actually, it basically comes from a word which means restricted. It comes from a word, Latin word, strictus, which means to be restricted or to be drawn tight. The idea of being overwhelmed or stuck. Anybody feel that? Stuck. Have you ever heard of the term cabin fever? Did you ever feel that in COVID? Where you literally felt trapped or stuck? You couldn't go anywhere, right? Even a mask, by the way. Talk about just wearing the mask. I realized that I needed to have mints more when I had my mask. That's one good thing. But other than that, you felt restricted, right? And in the Bible, this is what Jesus said in John 16:32-33. But a time is coming, indeed it is already here now, when you will be scattered, fragmented, each one of you to your own way. You're going to leave me alone. Yet I am not alone. Why? Because the Father is with me. Now, I've told you all of this that you may have peace in me. Here on earth, though, you will have what? Many trials and sorrows. But take heart, I have overcome the world. That word he uses there, so that word trial and sorrow is thalipsis. It's a word which means to be under pressure or to be confined to a narrow place, to be restricted without options. Isn't that interesting? So that actually is parallel to the Latin word, and Jesus used that word. In this world, there's going to be many times, not one time, many times where you're going to feel trapped, restricted, like a gun's put to your head, or somebody's putting you into a corner. That's where stress is related. You say, well, no, Craig, it's often with work. Yes, but it's how do we feel we'll be perceived by that work if we fail? That's a stress. It's often with attachment relationships. And that's why often people feel without options, no escape, trapped, all consumed, never being able to make it, imprisoned. By the way, do you think all of these words here, do you think you could feel that in a relationship? Trapped, suffocated, without a way out? You're at a job, and you have to have that job. And you have a manager or somebody over you that doesn't understand you. Trapped. You have a partner who doesn't get it. Trapped, suffocated. 2.74 million. That's how many divorces there were in 2021. 2.658. That's how many divorces there were in 2020. 60% of them were in Ontario. People said, yeah, it was because of COVID. No, what COVID did is what? Confine us. We were restricted. And now you're with that person. And you go, oops. And that's very real. And we should have that's why we need these seminars to talk about this. So these words carry the root idea of restriction and feeling limited. But notice, they also create a psychosomatic state. In other words, it affects the body. And it mimics, this is what it mimics: headaches, sore throat, heart or panic attacks, respiratory problems, digestive problems, and bowel problems, and adrenal gland problems. That's just what stress does. And it's important we realize that it's not just an issue, it's just a mental state. It's more than just a mental state. It affects the nervous system as well. And so stress occurs, and this is key, where there is a situation, event, and here's the key word, interpreted to create a sense of feeling constricted. What do you think I mean by interpreted to be? What does that mean? It's interpreted. right here in your head. The perception that we've interpreted. It's the lenses in which we interpret that situation. Because here's a fact. Someone could be in the same situation as you and would not have that effect. That's also true of trauma. Someone could actually be in a traumatic situation and not feel the same sense of what's gone on. Which doesn't mean, by the way, anybody's wrong. It just means we interpret it different. Does that make sense? That's why we have to leave space for one another to individually experience what we're going through and not just go, that's a lot of rubbish. What's their problem? No, we need that space to help people and listen to them and see what their interpretation of a situation is. Key thought, an individual stress response, this is a quote, an individual stress response is largely determined by his or her interpretation of an event rather than the event itself. That is so key. And if you just went home right now and you did that, it would help you work through 60 to 65% of your anxiety. It's not the event. It's the interpretation of the event, which doesn't make you wrong if you're stressed by it, but you need to learn from it. We're going to see that tonight. Remember, a situation never makes or breaks us. It reveals where we need to mature. A situation never makes or breaks us. It simply reveals areas we need to grow, areas we need to mature in, or it validates areas we have matured in. I had a client recently say, you know what, 2 months ago I would have done X, Y, Z in that situation. The same situation happened, I saw it differently. But it was still terrible. There were still things I had to work on, but I interpreted it differently. That's interesting. So there's 4 types of stress. Acute stress. Basically, the word for acute simply means sharp or pointed. I like that. It's kind of like it's like a goad. And it's basically, acute stress is common. Acute stress can happen in a car accident, losing a loved one, actually also witnessing something going wrong. That's acute stress. It's common, it happens, it affects us, it's significant, and don't forget this, it's not just someone going through something, it's if you're witnessing that as well. If you're witnessing abuse, or you're witnessing a child witnessing her mom being hit, or you're witnessing an accident, or you're driving and there's been an accident, you get out and help, though you're not in the accident, you witnessed or are a part of that accident. Does that make sense? So it's not just what happened to someone else. You can witness that trauma, witness that car crash, or you have a good friend who's going through a divorce. You never thought that would happen. Or somebody you know has an affair. Well, that doesn't affect me because it's my friend and her husband having an affair or whatever. They had an affair. No, it affects you. A colleague at work is going through pancreatic cancer, was just diagnosed. There may be fears. What happens if I get that? Or it might be a trigger because you've lost a parent of cancer. All of those stresses mean something and shouldn't just be fluffed away. We often lack the emotional and cognitive resources to interpret the event. Therefore, it becomes overwhelming. We often, and by the way, it's only one way we grow, through pain. Here's a fact, there is no other way we're going to grow this side of heaven. Now, unfortunately, this culture is a culture of convenience and comfort. Have comfort, it's kind of like lazy boy furniture, live life comfortably. And don't get me wrong, there's a time for that for sure. But a large part of life, believe it or not, it's painful. People that we love will die. There'll be losses and betrayal. But we often are shocked when that happens, and to a degree that's understandable, but it's important that we think about that actually loss and pain and suffering takes place more common than we think. Acute stress. People can also have acute stress when they are preparing for a job interview. So or going to a doctor or a dentist. So it can be anticipatory. So you're anticipating an important moment. A wedding day can actually create stress. I just had a couple that I did premarital counseling with, and the lady does struggle with stress. And I said, just give me a call whenever you go into your panic attack. She got married on Saturday, and on Monday she gave me a call. It was quite appropriate. We prayed. I chatted with her. She said, I know I'm fine, but I was just nervous. I'm young. I said, I knew that was going to happen. No problem. She said, but I'm excited about being married, so why did I have a panic attack? Because it's different. You're moving into a whole sphere of your life, an exclusive. You've never been this way before. That's okay. And she goes, that makes sense again. She said, you reminded me of that, but until I've lived it, that was key, until I actually lived it, I wouldn't have known. And that's beautiful. When daily activities become overwhelming and the weight of the tasks seem overwhelming, that can create acute stress. And again, it's the what? The anticipation and the interpretation that we give to that event. And remember, it's often before the event happens. It's not just in the event, it's the anticipation of the event as well. How many of you can remember going to a job interview or being asked to do something, and you find yourself in the washroom before that event, or you find yourself, clammy hands before you get there? And if anybody asks, how you doing? And what do we say? Oh, fine. Yeah, good. You got dry mouth, you're sweating, or, your armpits. Well, that's all a stress response. But it's not necessarily bad. It's acute, but it's still overwhelming. And after the job interview, or after the talk, or whatever the case may be, you go home, and what do? You just plop down. It just saps the energy out of you. Well, that's very normal. That's acute stress. Here's some symptoms. Fast heart rate and breathing rate, increased perspiration, increased irritability. You have it right in front of you. Having no or reduced memory of a traumatic event. Avoiding people, places, or things that remind you of the traumatic event. Hyperarousal, so a hyper-focus, hyper-energy, because the blood rushes to the muscles, and it rushes away from your heart, so you increase the beats per minute, and you have this response that something has to happen. Feeling numb, detached, or having reduced awareness of what's happening around you. And by the way, if you've ever done a wedding speech and you were really nervous about it, and then you go back and watch the tape, I didn't say that, did I? And you may not even remember doing that. Or if it was some other talk, or somebody said, oh, you said this and this. I did? And you stumble, right? Having distressing thoughts, dreams, or nightmares, depending on obviously the stress. Sleeping difficulties, feeling restless, being easily startled, having difficulty focusing your attention, feeling tense, and feeling heightened irritability, sometimes leading to a disgust or hatred of others, depending on the stress. So for instance, Christmas, that's a good time. What do you mean Aunt Mavis is coming? Ugh. And so that can create its own stress. Christmas often isn't a time to bring people together. It's often when people are, but that can create its own stress. It's true. Or you remember something, or you see someone, you're going in the supermarket, you've had a hard time with them, and they're in the aisle. They're coming down the aisle. They haven't seen you. And all of a sudden, you want to make a beeline away from them. That's a stressor. That's a stressor. And then you do actually bump into them. Oh, hi, I didn't see you. And you're like, why are you even here? And you're looking for, oh, look, an obvious distraction. And then you try to leave. That would be stress. Episodic stress. Episodic acute stress refers to frequent but now consistent periods of stress whereby the stressful occurrence occurs on intermittent or regular basis. In other words, if you're on a project and you can't get rid of the job, you can't get rid of the project, and you have deliverables that you have to have over a 4 to 5 month period, and it keeps messing up. Or you're having to see someone over and over again trying to work on something. And so it's consistent. It's not just going, right? You're recovering from an injury, and you're in rehabilitation, and you wish you could go play your sport. It's summer, but you can't. So, you're done. I had one of my clients did sport, and they were going to go play rugby for a New Zealand team, and they hurt themselves, and the rehabilitation was slow, and it just carried on and carried on, and they just, every time they went to rehab, they almost wanted to be better, but they declined. That was its continued stress. Now, it's also important, there can also be a sense of something going wrong in the future based upon what keeps going wrong over here. So now you anticipate it, and now it creates a deeper kind of stress. So here's a couple of them, and I'm sure nobody in this room has ever gone through this. Feeling irritable or angry because you know you're going to be betrayed. You know you're going to be marginalized. You know you're going to be invalidated. Increased heart rate, panic attacks, heartburn or indigestion. Do you realize how stress affects our digestive system? It's insane. Muscle pain or tightness, traps, neck, migraines, shoulder blades, heart disease. Now we're getting serious. That if you keep in resentment and bitterness, it actually can affect your heart. One of the talks we're going to do is on forgiveness and working through conflict, and heart disease has been connected to, not only exclusively, but not forgiving, that resentment. High blood pressure, another one. Frequent headaches. So those are some, again, you have those in your notes. Now, what about chronic stress? Now, chronic stress is an ongoing and constant stress with no or limited relief. Now, all of a sudden, you can't get out of this. What would be an example of that? Well, you're stuck. Yeah, children. Yeah. Well, let's say you have, and that's not a, let's say you had a child who rebelled over years and years and there's nothing you can do about it. Or a child incarcerated. You know, you've got to think of that. That's incredible. That's an ongoing stress, right? What's another one that would be ongoing? Money. Yeah, let's say you're in quite a lot of debt, you can't get out of it, and every time you hear the phone ring, you think it's a creditor, that could be it. How about health issues? You're not going to be able to get out of that genuinely. A friend of mine lost his leg and had to learn at 60 how to walk again. But wow, it took, that was an ongoing occurrence, and it created all kinds of challenges. Chronic stress occurs in abuse, where abuse or witnessing abuse, somebody who's being abused constantly, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, sexual abuse, financial abuse, spiritual abuse, any of those abuses, long-term divorce or child custody battle. If you're going through a long term and there's no end in sight, and that can last years. High stress, high danger jobs. So that could be firefighters, police. I coach several police officers who go to suicides or they have to go to accidents. They absorb that. And it's not something you just switch off. You don't just switch that off. Ongoing housing or financial difficulties, living in a dangerous neighborhood. We didn't realize it, but living in South Africa where we lived, the ongoing violence, I was able to calibrate that until I remember on the 28th of February 2000, we took off out of Johannesburg, and I had this incredible relief, but I got a huge migraine. I'd been carrying stress for years, watching deaths, picking up babies, dead babies, people who had been hurt, going to calls where women had been raped, and I just click, and I just dealt with it. But eventually, I didn't realize that stuff built up. And the loss of our own child, and several other things that had gone wrong. So yeah, when you live in those crime-ridden neighborhoods or countries where there's lots of violence, abduction, when my son was also almost abducted, tracking him down, grabbing him back, that's what that did to me. But I learned to deal with it because that's reality. But when we came out of that, that's when I started getting type 2 diabetes. I got I had a heart attack 3 years ago. So things started playing on me over time, but I stored it. The body keeps the score. The body keeps the score every time. What are some symptoms? Again, you have it in front of you because due to time, as I said, anything from, and this one, interesting, weight gain. Weight gain is not just through stress eating. Obesity, they have found in children and adults, come from adverse childhood experiences, by the way, of chronic stress. Fact. That's why in COVID, where a large portion of obese people died, not of COVID, but of complications. They didn't want to bring that up. You know why? Because you have to go back into those people's history and you will find a connection between obesity and adverse childhood experiences of abuse of some kind. And there's 12 different types, not just abuse, but parents fighting, ongoing stresses where there was no way out for the kids. All right, eustress. This is the one stress that is actually good. Eustress is basically positive. When you're trying a new hobby, or you're trying something new, or there's a little bit of a stress, or you want to propose, or you want to talk to somebody about something, about maybe a business deal that may go well, that you've got good friends, or you haven't seen a relative in a long time. You visit them overseas or whatever. That's eustress. You're kind of excited. It's not a bad stress. In fact, the word eu means good, so it's good stress. And so that's a positive kind of stress to have. Now, what about anxiety and how they're connected? Well, here again, anxiety is a state of apprehension of a perceived or actual threat that results from anticipating or an expectation that something we think might be dangerous or unpleasant. That's key. It's an apprehension of a perceived or actual threat that results from anticipating or an expectation something we think might be dangerous or unpleasant. Can you see how the word fragmented or fractured comes into play here? So it doesn't mean it's going to happen. You may think it's going to happen. And that's why how we think plays a huge part in eventually what we feel. So let's break this down. Apprehension. Apprehension can be defined as what? Can anybody read that out? Apprehension is? Good. It's an apprehension that something fearful or bad or unpleasant will happen. Anticipate. An expectation or a prediction. On one of our seminars we're going to do is on distorted thinking. And one of the things that an expectation or a prediction can have is called catastrophizing. I make a mental script on how this person's going to do this, that's going to happen, that's going to happen. I become the script writer, I become the movie director, I become the producer, and I give everybody their roles. Now, the interesting thing is I start acting like it's going to happen. Wow. And then when people don't respond as I think they should have, that can create its own stresses on its own. An expectation can be defined as the belief that something could, should, or will happen. Now, again, that doesn't mean bad things don't happen. They do. They do happen. But the anxiety is going, well, the history has told me this, therefore this will absolutely happen. And here's the reality. When it doesn't happen, when there's not a cross-check and going, you know what, that actually didn't happen. I just got to be careful of lumping that and magnifying it over here. Because if I don't, that's where I start having, this is where panic attacks come from. And again, anxiety is a perceived or actual anticipated threat, which is always what? Future-orientated. Even if it happened before, it does not mean it will happen again. Even if it happened before. Or even if it did happen again, it will not happen the same way it happened before. That's a fact. And that's key to be able to say that to ourselves. Because remember, it's a defensive system. It prepares us for danger. It prepares us for what? Perceived threats. So am I saying there's no such thing as danger? No, there is. There is also threat that's real. I had a client whose dad, when his dad would drive, he would hear the dad's truck in the driveway, he would go into this panic. Because if his dad had been drinking that night, he was assured there was going to be some type of violence. Well, the violence was on a continuum. Sometimes it was just a slamming in the door. His dad would swear, get the dinner, sit down at the table, and watch sit down at the couch and watch TV. But in his mind, it's as though he's gone through and beaten his mom. So that would play in his mind. Does that make sense? So his body kept a score. He became an adult. He couldn't watch a movie where a lady was being hit. Or a man would drink. It would create these feelings, and we never dealt with that. But it was very real inside of him. And remember, we often live and act as though it has happened, but it hasn't. A large percentage of the origin of anxiety is shaped by how we think about who or what is a threat. And you'll really like it when we go through, my next seminar is going to be in September the 23rd at the Quality Inn just behind the Tim Hortons. And we're actually going to talk about personality and temperament and conflict style and how that affects anxiety and affects how we respond. And that's helpful to know. That's why it's not on one size fits all, because everybody responds different. But how we think, how does a driver personality think about anxiety or a threat? How does an analytical think? They go into a vault. How does an amiable think? They go into a shell. How does a driver think? They go into a tank and arm themselves. How does an expressive go? Well, they look for the threat, they lose it with the crowd, then come back and buy coffees afterwards. We're all different on how we do that. Listen to what Jesus said. Jesus gave a parable. And even if you're not religious here, here's still a fact. He spoke and used metaphors, and one of the metaphors he used was of seed. So back then, when they would plant a field, they didn't do furrows or rows. They would actually throw the seed, and the seed would land on 4 types of ground: a path, shallow soil, weedy soil, so it would grow, but weeds would grow around it, and then good soil, and the tree would be pruned, and it would bear good fruit. So he said, the first one, the seed fell along the path. That's the person who has a hard heart. They hear truth, and they go, that's a lot of garbage. I don't need that. And he said, that's why Satan snatches that away. You can't teach that person. The second one is interesting, though. It's the shallow, where it's rocky, but it has no depth. And so that person, yeah, I want Jesus, I want God, I want to be different. But when a problem comes, it dies. Just like the sun would beat down with a plant with no root, it will die. It can't hold sustenance. And then he gave a third one. And others are the ones that were sown among thorns and weeds. These are those who hear truth, but the cares, merimna, their anxiety of this world, and the deceitfulness of riches, and the desires, epithumos, the desires of other things, enter in and choke the word. It chokes that person, making them unfruitful. Anxiety does what? Chokes. It restricts. And so you have to cut away those weeds. Isn't that a beautiful illustration? Even if somebody's not a Christian, they've got to turn around and go, that makes sense. That makes sense to me, that's what happens. In Philippians, the Lord is at hand. Do not be, there's the word again, fragmented about anything, fractured by anything, but in everything by prayer, face to face with God, supplication, letting him know what's going on, thanking him, let your request be known to God. And listen to this. And the irene, the peace, the positional and practical peace of God, which passes our understanding, does what? It guards our heart, our emotions, and our minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers, so whatever is true, honorable, just, pure, lovely, commendable, if anything is excellent, if anything is worthy of praise, what does he say? Logizomai. Think on these things. Weigh them up. He could have used any Greek word he wanted. He could have used nous, which is mind. He could have used phroneo, which means condition the mind. He doesn't. He uses logizomai. And if anybody here is an accountancy or an accountant or likes Excel spreadsheets, that's what that word means. It's to weigh up what is right, what is wrong, what's beneficial, what isn't. Isn't that interesting? The Bible teaches that. Because it happens here. It happens here. And that's key. It's in how we think and perceive. I think we've been looking in all the wrong places when we discuss attachment anxiety. Since the fall of Adam and Eve, we live in a fallen and broken world. Without question, lives are fractured. And here's why. Because I believe we need to look at anxiety and stress in systems. There are 20 systems that make up the human body. 20. Can you think of any of them? And let me know which one you can get rid of. Which systems? Well, think of the one that you like the most. I have one of my clients, a yoga teacher, so she likes breathing through the respiratory system, and it helps to calm things down. I like that. How about the cardiovascular system, digestive system, the nervous system? There are 20 material. In other words, doctors can see them. You can see them under a microscope. You can study them. But there are 20 systems inside of us that you can't see. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. This is what the Bible says about the systems in terms of attachment. The human body has many parts. True or false? Good. And this is in 1 Corinthians 12 to 28. But the many parts are made up of one whole body. So it is with the body of Christ. Some of us are Jews and some are Gentiles. Some are slaves, some are free. But we all have been baptized into one body by one Spirit, and we all share the same Spirit. Yes, the body has many different interrelated parts, not just one part. If the foot says, well, I'm not part of the body because I'm not a hand, that does not make it any less part of the body. And if the ear says, well, I'm not part of the body because I am not an eye, well, that doesn't make it any less part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, picture that for a moment. If the whole body was an eye rolling down the road, how could you hear? And if the whole body was an ear, how could you smell anything? But our bodies have many parts, and God has put each part just where He wants it. So how strange a body would be if it only had one part. Yes, there are many parts, but only one body. The eye can never say to the hand, I don't need you. The head can't say to the feet, I don't need you. In fact, some parts of the body that seem the weakest and least important are actually the most necessary. And the parts we regard as less honorable are those we clothe with the greatest of care. So we carefully protect those parts that should not be seen, while the most honorable parts does not require this special care. So God has put the body together with an extra honor and an extra care are given to those parts that have less dignity. This makes for harmony among the members, so that all the members care for each other. If one part suffers, all the parts suffer with it. If one part is honored, all the parts are glad. All of you together are Christ's body, and each one of you are a part of it. That is key to remember in religion, in the body of Christ, that we allow difference and dignity, and particularly those parts that hurt. When we have a single mom that comes in, she should just get a job. No, we look after her. When you see somebody who's wounded, somebody who's addicted, afflicted, somebody who's been abused, somebody who's been hurt, an immigrant, somebody struggling with sexual identity, you don't just push those people out. No, you understand, you seek to understand them before you're understood. That's what God does. Often, people in religion are the only ones who shoot their wounded, as opposed to loving them and understanding them and taking time to understand that difference. And so the Bible talks about stress and anxiety, how it affects the immune system, but I believe that anxiety and stress is not just about the immune system. I think it has to do with a fragmentation and a fracture of the erosion of human relationships. Because all of human relationships are a system. The 20 books that I'm writing all have to do with the 20 systems that nobody sees, but affect us all the time. These are internal, immaterial systems that exist. And by the way, interpersonal neurobiology Neuroscience is now saying, oops, we looked at the brain, we forgot about the mind. We forgot about the conscience. Isn't that interesting? That we're more than just meat. We're more than just a brain. God has given us what? In Genesis 1:26, it says, God says, let us make man in our image. That's the word S-O-U-L. I'm reading a book right now called Neuroscience and the Soul. We're souls in a body. We are stewards and servants who take ownership of our unique roles, and we learn, we listen, we love. That's what the soul is in the book of Genesis. Isn't that interesting? We're stewards who take care of what God's designed. We take ownership of that responsibility. We understand our unique roles within marriage, within life, within society. And what do? We listen. We learn about one another. We learn from one another. We learn with one another. So we learn how to move forward together. And therefore we have selfless, sacrificial service to one another's life. And that's the word love. And so God created us, and I'm going to do one seminar just on that. Attachment, which we talk about tonight, is a big deal. Attachment is its own system. Temperament and personality, that's what I'll be doing on the 23rd, is its own system. There are 4 different types of temperament. Everybody has a leading one and a secondary one, and it affects how we relate. Thinking is a strategy. There are 5 different types of dysfunctional thinking, 3 types of functional thinking. Emotions. There's 9 different functions to emotion. Who knew that? 9 functions to emotion. Not just fight, flight, and freeze. There are 9 functions. And what does the word emotion mean, by the way? What does it actually mean? Emotion. There's your hint. Emotion. It means to move away. That's what the word actually means. Emotia. Interesting, resentia means to feel again. And to move away, to move. Values, that's a system. Our trauma, complex trauma. Does anybody here know somebody who has been abused in some way in their childhood? That's complex trauma. Anybody know somebody who has been adopted or fostered because they had to be taken out of their home? They have trauma. Any child, by the way, whose mother had trauma and drinking and smoking during pregnancy creates what they call fetal alcohol syndrome. It's based upon the trauma in utero, and the baby feels that. We have gone through that for the last 5.5 years with our adopted daughter. She's just come out of some of that this last number of months, where she wakes up with night terrors, doesn't go to bed till 10, 11 at night, and wakes up at 2 in the morning, bites herself, and screams. So we've had that ongoing for a number of years, but she's coming out of that. We don't blame the mom for that shame. Her mom had gone through incredible things, her biological mom. But yeah, that's real trauma. Defense mechanisms, there's 44 of them. They're a system, though, attached to these others. Did you know that shame was a system? We all hide and cover the things we don't want anyone to know. We have image management, brand management, impression management now. So we show a managed part of ourselves, but all of that shame. We want people to see a different part of us, because if they knew who we really were, they'd reject us. And churches, by goodness, they can be hugely that way. How I look on a Sunday. How's everything going? Good. No. How's everything really going? Good. Well, that's interesting. I just saw you and your wife arguing like crazy in the car. Oh, yeah, that's nothing. Yeah, it is something. That's fine. My wife and I have done the same thing. But we often don't give space for that. Mourning and grieving. It takes 5 years to mourn and grieve. 5 years. The first 2 years suck. The first 2 years are just... I've had the honor of working with 11 widows over the last 2 years. The last 4 years now, sorry. And those anniversaries, those firsts, that first year, it's a heartache. And so mourning and then grieving, working that through is massive. And here's key. Our dark side, everybody in this room has a dark side, including myself, and it's a system. We have values, but we sabotage. We have good personalities, but we have conflict styles. We have emotions, which are very constructive, but we can have destructive emotions. Every one of these 20 has its own dark side. And here's the key. Has anybody ever heard of the word sin? Sin. S-I-N. It's a Greek word which means hamartia, to no longer be a part of an original relationship, to substitute that relationship, individualistically insulate and isolate myself, and then navigate my world negatively all on my own. That's what the word sin means. Ever done that? Ever substitute a relationship? Ever cut yourself off, shut someone down, withdraw, hide? Ever navigate and make decisions going, well, I know the road's closed, but who knows? Ever done that? Ever see on a bench wet paint? Oh, that's just an instruction. I'll wet it. No, it's not an instruction. It means it's wet. Paint, don't sit there. But we go ahead and do it anyway. I had a good friend of mine. His dad would ask him to do something, and he said, so, Tim, I want you, slam. Come back 10 minutes later. What do you want me to do? So excited about helping, but running away, running off, and would never listen, never hear. People say, oh yeah, that's teenagers. Really? That's just teenagers. No, we're like that too. So how is our thinking systemically shaped? How does our thinking get shaped? There's two places in the Bible. I'm just going to mention these. You have them in your notes. And I want to highlight the blue part there. When God created the world and he was going to create the flood because everybody's life had gone really to pot, he stands there and he goes, you know what? I look at creation and every intention of the thoughts of the heart of somebody brings misery, pain, suffering, and loss. And after the flood in Genesis 8:21, Noah builds him. There's only 8 people left. He builds him an ark and he said, never will I cause a flood to come on the world. Listen to this. Even though every thought or intention or inclination of the thoughts of a heart of an individual bring misery and destruction. The word inclination is an important word. It's the word to shape and strategize. That's what the word means. It means to systemically shape and strategize. We get the word pottery. You know, where a potter, where they have the potter and the wheel and what's that thing called? It spins around. Is that a potter's wheel? Yeah. And then they put the water on and they shape it. That's what that word means. And it means to fill something with that you shaped. That's what our thinking is. That's back in Genesis. The Bible says we have strategies in our heart. The number one question in all relationships, what are my and their inclinations, intentions, motives, and what strategies will they use to get what they want? That is the number one question every person asks. People say, oh no, I never ask that question. You do all the time. What's their motive? What's their intention? Can I trust them? Anybody here been betrayed ever or let down? Okay? That's the first question people ask. How do I trust somebody? A business deal gone wrong, or somebody said they'll show up and they don't. We look at that. Now, we often start with what is there without including what is my. What is my inclination? What's my motive? What's my strategy? What am I going to get out of this? And imagine if 2 people could put that on the table before they even date, before they even talk, before they even go into business, before they even discuss something. I need you to know I have a dark side. Here it is. Well, I'm so pleased you brought that up because here's my dark side. You said, Craig, are you kidding? Nobody does that. Yeah, but they should. Because notice how often we'll be quick to judge, but we won't look in the mirror. Right? We don't look in the mirror. When there's something good happening, we look in the mirror. And we look in the window, out the window, we go, oh, somebody else did that. When something we feel good about ourselves, we'll look in the mirror. And we have that tendency not to be honest. The thoughts and the interpretations about threats and anxiety, which create an apprehension and a fear that we anticipate, it makes up our minds. This is a threat, this is a danger, and they're made up of what has shaped our strategic thinking. So the question is, where was our thinking shaped? Who shaped it? Who shaped it? Well, it was within our primary attachment relationships. Where we grew up. Now, hear me on this. This is not Freudian. I'm not going, well, it is because of my mother, my father. That is why I'm a whole lot of a mess. No, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is where we grew up had a significant issue and a significant influence on us. That's key. We learn to think about ourselves and relationships from our family of origin. Did you ever hear your mom and dad say, oh no, we're not going to hang around with that family, or keep away from that family? And then later on you found out there was actually nothing wrong with them. Your dad or your mom had a hard time with them, but actually you got on well with the kids. But you were taught, your family is superior in some way. We learn about our values, our acceptability, lovability, and worthiness within our families growing up. Now, we've got to be very careful to say, well, all I'm going to do is accept Jesus and God because that's all I need to do. Because if I do that, then it's going to take away all of that. If I had dysfunction or abuse, well, here's how it will go. If you don't understand where you come from and how you related growing up, you attach that to God. You attach that figure of what you saw growing up to God. He's that way. Because they're your only reference. Because when you hear that God is a what? Father, it's very easy to attach how you grew up that God's going to expect me of that off me, which can have incredible destructive principles. So we learned about ourselves from our primary caregivers. So what is needed for a secure attachment? Let's start in a very healthy way. There are 9 characteristics, 9 requirements if you were brought up in a secure attachment. First one, you had a guaranteed closeness, an anticipatory closeness that your mom and dad would be there for you irrespective of what you did. They would be close. You knew they would take care of you. They knew they would be there. Whether there was danger, whether you had an argument, whether something went wrong, even if you did something really dumb or hurtful, you know they were available. Next, they modeled strategic, sensitive service. There was an unconditional love. It wasn't based upon your performance, it was based upon whose you were. Does that make sense? Is that because of who you were as a person? Because they saw value in you. There was a mutually exclusive relationship. They would find ways to figure things out with you, find ways to find you, find ways to show you and reinforce that you're loved. My little daughter, though she's adopted, interesting what she said the other night. She snuggled up to me because 3 nights I sleep next to her, 4 nights Renee does, just because either that we didn't sleep in the first 3 years, actually, that we realized we're going to be in separate beds. And she was snuggling and she had a night terror, and I held her and I pulled her forward and I go, I love you. And she goes, I love you too. Ooh, I love you too. And I said, what are you doing? I said, because I want to shave this off. No, it's my safe spot. And she started just playing with my beard. And she's like half asleep. She goes, I love you too. And she goes, thanks for being my daddy. And she kissed me on my cheek and she fell asleep. You know, you can't buy that. But that safety, that she knows she's safe. And what she'll do, she'll take my arm, my hand, and she goes, put it over me, hold me so I'm safe. She'll literally say that. She knows. I led her to Christ on the 26th of March this year. And the idea, she goes, I've seen that you're safe, that God is safe because you're safe with me. Notice what she did. Because I said I believe in God and I'm an earthly father, but she says, you're modeling. She didn't use those words, but I'm going to be safe with God because I'm safe with you. It does matter. It matters. Seek to understand before you're understood. That is so critical. I don't know what the mu is in the end, so don't worry about that. But seek to understand before you're understood. That your mom and dad said, you tell me what went wrong. Not, you did it again. How many times did I tell you? Oh my goodness. Well, no. Listen, I'm sick of your excuses. As opposed to going, tell me what happened. What went wrong? What happened? How did it happen? Working it through, seeking to understand. 4, available to speak to in order to learn about, to learn from, to learn with, and to learn to. That doesn't mean the parents aren't busy, but they always make time in some way to be available to work through some of the issues. And there's that availability for them. 5, a secure base that you could have returned to when you explore your world, particularly when there's threats, problems, or challenges. And it's always, by the way, this starts at 1.5 years old. So when a child is crawling away or walking away, they'll do this. That's key. And we'll talk about what that is in just a moment. But they'll look, but they know that mom or dad was a secure base. So you knew that. A safe haven. There's a meaningful relationship that will partner with you to process these threats. They're safe to do that. Number 7, attuned to you emotionally. They affirmed you. They didn't have to agree with you, but they affirmed you. Their tone, tact, timing, tenderness was thoughtful and thought through. They sought to understand, that's you. They navigated and nurtured. There was an empathic engagement, that's E, and there was a discernment and a discipline. They trained you, and it was done in a discerning way. It was a timely word. By the way, so far, how many of you grew up in that kind of a home? Good. Amen. How many of you didn't? That's important to know. Now, this is the big one. They meet your needs by mirroring you. There's a pair bonding. So, when a baby is born, the moment the baby is born, and the baby's put on mama's chest, the mom through the right eye looks through the right eye, and what research has shown is called a pair bonding. And so when mom goes, hi honey, there's that pair bonding, and it's a Wi-Fi. Think of Wi-Fi. And it goes into the emotional part of the brain, and it opens the pituitary gland in the base of the brain called oxytocin, and there's a pair bonding. There's a latching on. And by the way, it's true of dads too, by the way, not just moms. I used to, when Renee was pregnant with Stephen, I would talk to her tummy, literally. And I'd have big conversations with my son. Didn't know he was going to be a boy. It's interesting. I had to go to the States for 7 weeks when he was 2 months old. He didn't go to another guy. I came back from the airport, and I thought, this guy going to remember me? And Renee was breastfeeding in our home. I walked in, and I went, where is he? And he pulled away from her breast, and he was doing this. He heard my voice. The pair bonding was there, and that's key. So what are mirror neurons? That's where there's a connection where thoughts, emotions, and emotional maturity is developed primarily through what? Eye contact. Eye contact. That's true in romantic relationships, and it's true of parenting. You've got to look in the eyes. It's interesting. It says that in Deuteronomy that Israel were the apple of God's eye. That they look at them. You're my chosen. You're my firstborn son, and I see you. You'll see over and over again this word used, to see, or the word behold in the Hebrew. It means to look and to see, to look at, to gaze upon. Now that's my daughter when she was a baby. Notice I was practicing mirror neuroning, so I did this with my face, and that's the face she pulls. And then I raise my eyebrows, she raises her eyebrows. She mirrored me. And I would do this, and she'd go, that's mirror neuroning. And I didn't say a word, I just did the faces. That's often what happens. Where children are not seen or heard, and there's no looking at them. Nothing can replace presence. And by the way, that's true of even romantic relationships. Imagine that. Guy meets girl, guy goes up to girl, hey, how's it going? And she goes, and she's looking, yeah, I'm good. Yeah, good. Yeah, okay. One moment. Oh, you're still here. Oh, how's it going? Yeah. Alfonso will be dropped real quickly. Because it doesn't work that way. It's across the room. You know, my wife and I, we hate going away we never go actually on Valentine's to a restaurant. But what we did a couple of times, we just drove around and walked around the restaurants that are in Aurelia. Insane how many folks were doing this. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the phone, by the way, but not when you're trying to have eye contact. And that's key. And here's the 9th one. Perseveres with us. Through the tough times, the pain, the misery, the loss, the broken relationships, they develop a perseverance on crisis and challenges. A crisis becomes an opportunity to learn about who's and who we are. We develop coping skills, we understand thresholds, and we learn about and mature through post-traumatic growth. Every one of these actually have scripture. What's the time? I got 5 minutes to go. What's the time? Okay. 7:40? Perfect. So, these are the 4 attachments. Secure, anxious, avoidant. These are not in your notes. The description is in your notes. So a secure attachment, there's a very low anxiety of abandonment, and you know you can be connected. A avoidant attachment is that there's basically a low abandonment, but also there's not going to be anyone seeking out relationships. So there's a high view of self and a low view of others. An anxious attachment, there's a high view of other people, but a low view of self. And then a disorganized attachment, there's a low view of self, low view of others. So just look at those 4. How would somebody with an avoidant attachment deal with anxiety? The bottom left. How would they deal with anxiety? Yeah, they would shut down. They would leave. They'd walk away. They wouldn't share anything. How would anxious ambivalent or anxious preoccupied? Yeah, they would cling. They'd run after everyone. They'd actually take the fault at times. They'll be high anxious. That doesn't mean that they're not anxious, but they go into a vault. They don't say anything. They shut down. They withdraw. They keep busy. They're independent. Go back there. They become more anxious because they don't believe they can exist without others. And this one is often where somebody has been abused and hurt, so they can be erratic. It's actually like walking on eggshells because you don't know where that person's going to be because they're explosive, because they haven't had a secure attachment. Now, we don't have the time, obviously, to go through all of these, but avoidant, in the bottom line, let me just show you with my hands. So avoidant, the child, mom and dad. Mom and dad did not know how to process through emotion. So as long as the child did what was asked and performed, things went well. But when the child struggled with their own stuff, whatever that was, problems, mom and dad either told them to suck it up or be independent or press forward. We don't deal with that in our family. It created avoidant and dismissive. They knew to shut it out. Here's the other one, anxious. So the anxious, preoccupied. Child, mom and dad. Mom or dad had their own needs. So the child would learn to meet the parents' needs, run after the parent, take care of one of the two of the parents, be the clown or be the mascot, to do something that will take care of the family. their needs were never met. So they didn't know what to do with it. So they become incredibly anxious. So as an adult, let me just quickly go through this. As an adult, I'm uncomfortable with close relationships. That's the avoidant. I'm uncomfortable with close emotional relationships. It is important for me to feel independent and self-sufficient. And I prefer not to depend on others or have others depend on me. And shame is covered by a sense of completely performing, not needing anybody. And again, these are all in your notes. They secretly desire a relationship, but they fear criticism, and that's why they become very cynical and critical themselves. Very critical and cynical. Keep record of wrongs. So they avoid, dismiss, shut down in conflict. They fail to attune to emotions, and they often clothe their shame with a condemning, critical spirit. They're always pessimistic, always keeping a record, as I said, of wrongs. The anxious, as a child, as an adult, I want to be completely emotionally intimate with others. But I often find that others are reluctant to get as close as I would like. I'm uncomfortable being without close relationships, but I sometimes worry that others don't value me as much as I value them. So there's a constant anxiety. Emotionally, they're insecure. They lack not being enough. There's a secret tension between loving, loathing, and latching on to people. They are afraid that they're going to be a disappointment and others will disappoint them. There's a messy tension because they're enmeshed, but then they can rescue, enable, and run after and get used. You've got to walk in eggshells around them because they can be reactive in themselves, and particularly if they feel betrayed. So they can be paranoia, distrusting, and they often give, if it's a female, sex for love. They become clingy. They have this deep ache to know that they're going to be looked after. So that brokenness is there. And then they can often attack and be aggressive and defensive if cornered. Look at the last one. This is a child whose parents, they were given up for adoption or given up for fostering, or they were abused. So it was done in a harsh way. That doesn't mean all adoptions are bad, but they were given up. So the parent struggles with their own shame, their own trauma, their own history of trauma, etc. So they develop complex trauma. But look, as an adult, I'm bound to be hurt in a relationship, so I will hurt before I get hurt, or I must dissociate. They cut themselves off. There's a confused feelings of vagueness, insecure attachment, sadness, shame, and guilt. They are immediate reactive in 3 areas. They freeze, and that's key. They freeze, leads towards surrender of hurt. They flight, they run, or they fight without substance. And here's the key. No one will ever control me again. Their mind, their emotional brain is on a constant state of alert. They have a shame rage. And again, there's a paradox and tension between connecting and wanting to be loved, and a shame identity of a suffocating defense mechanism. Can you see how anxiety and stress is created just from that? They haven't even entered into a relationship yet. And so kids that are brought up like that, we need to have patience with them. We need to care for them because their anxiety levels are more than just giving them medication. It's understanding where they come from. So right now, if you were to think of what your attachment style might be and how it could affect your anxiety, how many of you would see you had a avoidant attachment primarily growing up with your mom and dad? Avoidant. Okay. How many would have had an anxious attachment? Because you could be all 3, by the way, but anxious. Anxious. Okay. How about disorganized? Your parents had their own trauma, their own pain, their own losses. And that's why we can be in a percentage in each of them. And it's important to understand it. I will explain that better when we meet in September. Is that good? All right, very good. I want to say thank you so much. I hope this has been helpful. If this was a good use of your time, just quickly tell me why. Why was this a good use of your time if it was? Anybody? Self-awareness. Amen, yeah. Yes. Absolutely. Anyone else, if that was a good use of your time? Yes, Aaron.
Helps us to be able to communicate better with our spouses or people in relationships that we have.
That's right. Because if you can figure out somebody's temperament, conflict style, and attachment and values, just those, you will value and appreciate that relationship much deeper. And that's why. Then you won't take it so personally. So let's look to our Lord in prayer. Lord, we thank you that you are the great attachment. We thank you that you sent your Son, Christ, to die for us in our place, and you gave us life. Thank you that we have a guaranteed closeness with you. We have a guaranteed presence that you're available to seek us. And Father, you adopted us. You adopted us in your Son, Christ. Father, you're a safe haven, a secure base. Lord, you meet our needs. You see us. You look upon us. And Father, you persevere with us. How grateful we are for you, because many of us, though our fathers and mothers forsook us because they were imperfect, not necessarily always terrible, but they were imperfect like we are, but you received us. And Lord, help us to realize we can have a sense of security by working through our anxiety and stress because of whose we are with you and whose we are with one another, therefore who we are. And now would you bless and keep every family here, every family in Coldwater, and would you keep helping us as we unpack these areas of attachment in Jesus' precious name, amen.